Ladies and gentlemen, Zohran Mamdani has thoughts about Bibi Netanyahu.
Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal, the architect of a horrific genocide against the Palestinian people. He is responsible for the killing of more than 73,000 people.
I'm Rich Lowry of National Review, and most mayors of major cities don't give video addresses about foreign leaders they don't like. But obviously, Israel, a major animating issue for Zohran Mamdani. He said in the past that he wants to arrest Netanyahu. He's now come to the conclusion, regretfully, he can't, but he still wants him to face justice.
As I've said, I agree with the ICC that Benjamin Netanyahu should be arrested and tried for his crimes, as I do for anyone else charged by the ICC. My administration has reviewed every avenue available under applicable law to determine whether New York City could execute the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant if Benjamin Netanyahu came here. It is clear that we do not have the independent legal authority to enforce this warrant. The federal government, however, does, and I call on them to join the ICC and execute this warrant.
Now, this is Mamdani basically saying that Bibi Netanyahu should be arrested for pursuing a foreign policy he doesn't like. And this is quite rich coming from Mamdani because he tends to be suspicious of the criminal justice system at large. You could say, well, maybe if he does eventually succeed in arresting Bibi Netanyahu after he finds a legal authority somewhere, he wouldn't be able to hold him because he wants to shut down Rikers Island and have fewer criminals who are actually jailed in New York City. But this is the litany of charges he makes against Netanyahu.
For the maiming of tens of thousands of children, as those who survive undergo amputation without anesthesia. For the targeting of neonatal hospitals and maternity care centers, denying newborns even the chance to live. For the countless people he starved as he blocked food and humanitarian aid from reaching them. For the gunning down of hundreds of aid workers and journalists. And just last month, the UN confirmed that Palestinian children continue to be deliberately targeted and killed by Israeli armed forces, more than 8 months after the so-called ceasefire. The list goes on and on.
Now, that truly is a parade of horribles, and there's no doubt there's been massive heart-rending suffering in Gaza. But of course, Mamdani doesn't mention any of the relevant context. He obviously doesn't mention, he really never does, that it was October 7th, this pogrom carried out against Jews in Israel by Hamas. That was the precipitating event for this war, and then doesn't mention Hamas's tactics. Warfare in a densely populated urban environment is always awful and terribly destructive. Hamas has made it even worse by so entrenching itself in Gaza and deliberately going out of its way to secret itself among the civilian population, to carry out its continued attacks against Israeli troops from civilian areas in the hopes of creating more civilian casualties and civilian suffering, so that can be used as a propaganda tool against Israel by the likes of the mayor of New York City. Now, he makes it sound as though Israel just enjoys targeting hospitals. No, very often Hamas is secreting their fighters or digging tunnels under hospitals. He mentions aid workers and journalists killed. Well, in some of these cases, these people have been proved after the fact to have been Hamas fighters or organizers or activists. Also, it's a dense urban environment. People are collateral damage. It's terrible. You don't want it to happen, but there is not complete, utter precision in any warfare ever, and that goes with children as well. He said they've been deliberately targeted. I'm sure if Israel could carry out this war against Hamas without harming anyone else, they would. The fact is they can't. And if you want to just look at the real world test of this, prior to October 7th, Hamas would rocket Israel. Israel would occasionally retaliate, but there was basically an accommodation with Hamas in Gaza. Netanyahu made the terrible mistake of thinking they could be accommodated, they could be tolerated, and you could basically get along with them controlling Gaza. It wasn't until after this theory was proven terribly untrue that he launched the war. So that makes it seem to me there's no doubt that if Hamas tomorrow surrendered and said, you know what, the people of Gaza have suffered enough, we're standing down, we're giving up our weapons, and there should be free elections in Gaza, would Israel be bombing Gaza in that instance? No. And after all this years of warfare, the fact is Hamas is still there. Hamas is still armed. Hamas is still a threat to Israel and committed to Israel's destruction. But for Mamdani, it's taken that Israel is in the wrong, no matter what it does. And its enemies, if not in the right, certainly are to be tolerated, or at least not criticized, at least never with the same passion and energy he brings to making the case against Israel. Here he was, by the way, before October 7th.
Who is ready for Palestinian freedom? Who is ready for the end of apartheid? The support for the Israeli government is something that is developed from the first moment that someone even thinks about politics in this country. We have to combat it at the same level. Not on our dime! Not on our dime! Not on our dime!
So that's how he sounded before October 7th. That's how he sounded after October 7th. That's what he sounded like when he was largely just an agitator in the streets. That's what he sounds like when he's mayor of New York City. He looks better now. He looks neater, looks more official. He's got his desk. He's got his flags, but it's the same essential message. And that G word, the charge of genocide, is so important to adversaries of Israel like the mayor. One, it serves obviously to delegitimize Israel. There are legal consequences to it. That's the whole context of talking about whether he can arrest Netanyahu or not. It's the harshest thing you can say about any nation. And finally, I think a lot of people just enjoy turning the tables on Israel, the perversity of accusing the Jews of genocide, when obviously it was being the victim of a genocide that was one of the precipitating events for the creation of modern Israel as we know it. Now, Mamdani skips over a lot of other things that make this genocide charge obviously absurd. Bret Stephens, the New York Times columnist, was addressing this in a video the other day and mentioned all the things that Israel has done, even if you disagree with some of their tactics, even if you think the war has been hugely destructive, which it obviously has. These are things you wouldn't do if you were attempting to commit a genocide.
The Hutus killed the Tutsis by the hundreds of thousands over the space of 90 days. They weren't stopping, right? The Nazis were killing Jews as quickly as they possibly could in Auschwitz and Treblinka and so on, or at least the ones they weren't trying to work to death for utilitarian purposes, right? If Israel were trying to commit genocide in Gaza, why did it distribute polio vaccines, right? If Israel were trying to commit genocide in Gaza, why did it allow any food at all? If Israel were trying to commit genocide in Gaza, why was it dropping leaflets in different neighborhoods repeatedly saying, please get out of this neighborhood because we're going to attack it?
Then there's the fact that Mamdani could be equally upset about all sorts of other terrible things happening around the world, but we never hear about those. Bret Stephens makes this point very compellingly as well.
So I'm really disturbed by the fact that the one human rights atrocity, let's call it that for the sake of argument, that the left and the Democrats seem really animated about is Israel. That's the one thing they care about. And then they'll say, well, it's because we give Israel money. We give Turkey money. And Turkey has been...
We shouldn't give goddamn Turkey any money, sir.
I agree, by the way, for a whole host of reasons. But I never hear the argument made, Turkey occupies northern Cyprus in violation of UN resolutions. Turkey has an ongoing war of atrocities against innocent Kurdish civilians, not only in Turkey itself, but in Syria and northern Iraq. Oh, and by the way, we consider Turkey an indispensable NATO ally, and we have 50 nuclear gravity bombs parked at Incirlik Air Base, to the best of my knowledge.
Not that Mamdani cares. More from him.
And I want to be equally clear. Benjamin Netanyahu is not welcome in New York City, nor is any other war criminal at large. While we cannot end the genocide on our own, we can decide whether our silence will become another weapon, and we can examine every tool we have to defend the humanity and dignity of all people. That is my commitment to you.
Now, I don't think Bibi Netanyahu cares or should care whether Mamdani wants to welcome him to New York City or not. He has a perfect right to come here and address the UN Assembly this fall, which I assume he'll do. But the point Mamdani is making here at the end, though, shouldn't be neglected or dismissed. It's very important. What he's calling for basically is an unceasing propaganda war against Israel, and the unremitting use of this term genocide is a key pillar of that. And you have to say, this has been quite successful to this point. It's nearly mandatory now for Democrats to say Israel has committed a genocide in Gaza, even Democrats who are relatively moderate and not members of the DSA. And you also have elements of the right picking up the baton of this charge as well. So no, Bibi Netanyahu is not going to be in handcuffs in a New York City jail anytime soon, nor should he, but his critics have made significant progress in branding him as a war criminal, even if that's absurd and completely unsupported by the evidence. Hey, do yourself a favor, comment, like, subscribe. I promise you won't regret it. I'm Rich Lowry, over and out.